All right, everyone, it's about that time. Again, if y'all can kindly make your way to the seats. About to start this conversation here with the legend to my right. So, real quick before we get going, please make some noise for DJ Styles Bond, who's been
Word up.
the heartbeat of today's event. And of course, shouts out to the one and only DJ Dub, 1200 Flavors, for making this whole thing possible. The Flavor Summit, first annual, first of many more. My name is DJ Two Tone Jones, part of Shaolin Jazz, one of the proud owners of Fireplace Records in Hyattsville, Maryland, and want to welcome y'all out. Today, it is my pleasure to be able to sit here and speak with someone who's been an inspiration, I know, for many DJs in the room, someone who continues to raise the bar, and someone who wears many hats. I know a lot of people, first and foremost, think of him as a DJ, but he's a DJ, he's an entertainer, he's a historian, he's an author, he's a professor. So give it up for the one and only Queens, New York's finest, DJ Rob Swift, y'all.
I'm in Baltimore, right?
You and B more, brother.
You guys snatched one of our first basemen from the Mets, Pete Alonso. I miss him. I was watching the Orioles game yesterday on, I don't know what channel it was, but at my hotel, and I'm seeing Pete there in an Orioles uniform, just feeling sad. But you guys got a really good person at first place playing for y'all, so. But thank you for the introduction.
Yes, of course.
And thank you to my boy Jason for setting this up, curating today's event here in Baltimore. I'm really looking forward to talking with you, Tone, about all things hip-hop culture.
Yes. We'll kind of get into it. I have a weird question to kind of start with, and I'm going to reference this a little later, but just curious. Which one are you more of a fan of, Marvel or DC?
Ooh, that's a good one.
That's going to preface something else later, but.
I started out as a 6-7-year-old kid really into Marvel. Wolverine was like my favorite comic book superhero. Spider-Man as well. As an adult, I started getting into DC. I feel like DC is darker, it's more serious, especially the movies. So, but honestly, at the end of the day, I'm a fan of both. But if I had to choose one, I'd have to go with my 8-year-old version of myself and say Marvel.
Marvel, okay. All right, we'll get back to that. So I know you've been probably asked this a number of times. Where did DJing start for you? Like how long, if people ask like how long you've been DJing, around what year or time for yourself would you say you began being a DJ?
Being a DJ, I'd have to say age 12. 1984, officially, I started kind of dabbling in it a little in 83, but I would say 84 was the official year when I started DJing. And I have to credit my older brother for that, and my father, who passed away in October of last year. Rest in peace, Dad. I miss you to death. So my parents are Colombian. I know that when you guys look at me on the surface, you might think, oh, that's a black American born dude in a Mets hat, probably from North Carolina or Virginia, right? Florida. That's Sinister, by the way. Ad-libbing.
Shouts out to one and only Mr. Sinister, the other half of the Odd Couple right here.
Sir. My father was born in Chocó, Colombia. The slave trade in the 1400s dropped off Africans all over the world. Chocó is on the coast of the country where my dad's from, Colombia. Very small village, but it's right by the coast. Slave ships stopped there, and my family lineage can be traced back to Chocó, Colombia, and my mom is from Cali, Colombia. In 1969, my dad immigrated here to America for the same reasons that people from the Caribbean immigrated here, people from Central America, other parts of South America. people from the South. Remember, we had a great migration that took place to New York City right after World War II. And so in 1969, my dad uprooted himself from Colombia, arrived in New York City by himself, left my mom and my older brother because he wanted to get established. It's interesting because my dad met my mom at the hospital where my mom was learning to become a nurse. He was the supervisor there. And I say that to say when he arrived in New York City, he had to humble himself and start from scratch. He got a factory job at a plant in Long Island City called Lee Craft, and they used to make airplane parts. Got himself established there. After 2 years, he sent for my mom and my older brother from Colombia. They arrived in 1971. I was born, I know I don't look it to you guys probably, and I'm not saying that to come off conceited or anything, but I'm told that I don't look my age. I was born in 1972. So a year after my mom and my brother landed in New York City, they had me in Jackson Heights, Queens, and to this day I still live there. I give that background to say we grew up very poor. I remember, Sinister can attest to this, as a kid growing up on 89th Street, 3752, Jackson Heights, Queens, in a tenement building. And for those of you guys that may not know what tenement buildings are, think of one project building. So instead of a bunch of different projects, it's just one dilapidated building. The tenants lived on top of each other. I distinctly remember having rats and roaches as roommates. And I don't say that in a dejected, demoralized way. I say that with pride because my dad arrived in this new world, this new country with nothing and figured it out. And if it wasn't for his decision to come to America and establish himself, I would not be here in front of you guys talking right now as a DJ. I've been doing this since 1984, but professionally since 1997. That's when I moved out of my parents' home and got my own apartment, and I never worked a day job. All of the money that I make, the clothes I wear, the Mets hats that I buy, it comes from the money that I generate as a DJ. So I owe it to my dad, rest in peace. So during the 70s in New York City, there was a fiscal crisis. New York City was basically bankrupt. My dad had to humble himself and get a job at a factory. So to make extra money, he took up DJing and invested in equipment. Started DJing all through the 70s for his friends. Jackson Heights is a very heavily Colombian populated area of Queens. So us being Colombian, my dad had friends that would hire him to DJ birthday parties, weddings, first communions at churches. And my mom, my brother, and myself would help my dad pack his gear up, transport it as far as New Jersey sometimes, and I'd just watch him DJ and control a room of people. And so that was my first exposure to DJing. My second exposure was in my living room watching my brother use my dad's equipment behind his back when my dad would go off to work. On our days off from school, my brother would invite his friends from Corona, Queens, New York. Corona is where, at the time, Shea Stadium was. Now it's Citi Field. This is the area of Queens where Beatnuts are from, Cool G Rap and Polo. I believe Louis Armstrong lived in Corona, Queens. In East Elmhurst, which is the next town over, Malcolm X lived there. So that area, East Elmhurst, Corona, Queens. By the way, Mr. Sinister's from East Elmhurst. That area was heavily populated by Black American youth families, people that migrated to the north from the south. And so you have East Elmhurst, Corona, Jackson Heights, this mix of ethnicities and people that listen to different music. So my dad had the gear, but we grew up listening to salsa, merengue, cumbia, Latin music from South America. My brother was going to school with his Black American friends. And when I say Black American, don't get it twisted. I'm Black, right? And we'll probably get into that later on. But I say that to say, because we grew up in a household that celebrated Latin music, salsa, merengue, cumbia, we didn't have access to the James Brown records, to the Aretha Franklin records, the kind of records that DJs like Kool Herc, Africa Bambaataa, Grandmaster Flash, Grand Wizard Theodore, Tony Tone, Charlie Chase, Eddie Chiba, DJ Hollywood, all through the 70s played. So my brother would invite his friends, and his friends from Corona, Queens would bring their parents' records to our house because we had the gear. And they would come to our house. My dad would leave the house like at 7:30. At 7:31, my brother was calling his friends, come right now. My parents left. By 8:30, they're lugging in crates of records into my parents' apartment, turning my dad's equipment on, and making the kind of mixtapes that we grew up listening to, courtesy of Grandmaster Flash and Bambaataa and Herc. Bambaataa, who rest in peace, passed away a couple of days ago. So that was my exposure to hip-hop DJing through my brother. And when I graduated elementary school, PS 89 in Elmhurst, Queens, and moved on to junior high school, IS 145, I happen to live 2 blocks from there right now. In my 6th grade homeroom, there was a guy named Psycho Les, and Psycho Les is one half of the Beatnuts. Back then, he was just Lester Fernandez, and I was just Robert Aguilar. And I would bring by then my brother started digging for records and collecting his own music to make the tapes with his friends and stuff. So I would take my brother's records to school, and in homeroom, Les and I would just sit there and read the credits, read where they recorded the album, who engineered it. We just geeked out over album covers the way kids would geek out over comic books. One day, up until the day that I told Les that my brother was a DJ, I never thought to tell him. So one day, I just mentioned it to him when we were looking at some of the records that I brought to school. Oh yeah, by the way, my brother DJs. And Les looked at me like, dude, all this time, you have an older brother that DJs? You have gear at your house? Like actual gear that we could use, 2 turntables, a mixer, tape recorders, microphones. You never told me any of this. Like, bro, we're going to your house today after school, and we're gonna ask your brother to teach us how to DJ. And I was like, okay, cool. Sure enough, we went home to my parents' home, 89th Street, Jackson Heights, Queens. My brother's there chilling out, and we asked him to teach us how to DJ, and that's when I officially started.
Wow. So you bringing up, I'm glad you brought up kind of the backstory in terms of where the family's from. And I've noticed, I'll say over time, I've follow you on social media, and I know you make it a point to make sure that there is credit due, if you will, in terms of the representation of everyone kind of involved in creating, developing, and enjoying hip hop. So what would you say to, let's say, for instance, someone says just flat out, hip hop was created by African Americans, and just that. What is that missing if someone were to put that out there to you?
That's a question that is important for us to tackle, because in the last 6 years, there's been a narrative poisoning our culture. And being someone that was born in the city that birthed the culture, seeing what I saw as a kid, I think it's dangerous to exclude people that don't look like you from this culture, because this is a culture that was created by kids that were marginalized and poor in New York. And you don't have to be black to be marginalized or poor. And we'll get deeper into that. But I guess I'll start off answering your question by saying this. Aesthetically, as far as the landscape of hip hop, how it looks, in the 1970s, the people, or the youth, I should say, that were growing this culture without them realizing it, came from different parts. They weren't just Southerners or the children of Southerners. They were the children of Jamaican, Caribbean-born people. Who am I referencing? Let's start with Kool Herc. Kool Herc immigrated to New York City the same year that my dad immigrated to New York City, 1969. Kool Herc comes from Jamaica. Jamaican sound clash culture is the predecessor of hip hop culture. Why do I say that? In the 1970s, DJs like Kool Herc would take their gear, their sound system, and set it up in a park, because we're talking about marginalized youth. Remember, Kool Herc in the 70s is a teen. He's not a grown man, the Kool Herc that you picture now when I say his name. He's a teen. So he's not being allowed to enter any of the ritzy, high society nightclubs that DJs like David Mancuso, Francis Grazzo, Nicky Ciano played at in the 70s when disco was reaching its peak. Herc is a Jamaican-born kid that comes from the shanty towns of Jamaica. And in those areas, you had DJs that would set up their gear outdoors for the poor Jamaicans to enjoy music because they had nowhere to go. Techniques like scratching or juggling, repeating a sound over and over again on two turntables, was not the barometer for how you judged whether a DJ was good or whether you liked checking out a particular DJ. The barometer was, how loud can you play? How loud was your speakers? And this culture, this approach to playing music came from Jamaica. Sound clash culture. As early as 1952, DJs used to actually give their sound systems names like the Trojan or the Kilimanjaro. Nobody was doing that respectfully. And at the end of this discussion, anyone that disagrees with anything I'm saying, by all means, challenge me. I actually think I'm better at talking when I'm being challenged. But if you have other alternative facts, or you know things that you might feel could debunk what I'm saying, by all means, let's have a discussion about it. But no one in the Bronx, New York City, or anywhere else in the vicinity of the Bronx was taking out their sound system. Might have been having block parties. I'm not saying that there were no block parties before Kool Herc, but at those block parties, you didn't have giant speakers. And the people that were curating and throwing those block parties, their intent was not projecting the loudest sound system that they could possibly project. Herc was the catalyst for that approach to DJing, that mindset of, I want to have the loudest speakers. And Herc is Jamaican. He's not Black American. Yeah. Although in the 1970s, if you looked at Herc, he was a black guy. We didn't get into the splitting hairs of, but where is your family from? Bullshit, excuse my French, that exists now on social media amongst diaspora black folk, right? So then you had DJs like Africa Bambaataa, rest in peace. He's Bayesian. His parents, I believe, are from Barbados and Jamaica, right? So he's Jamaican and Bayesian. He brought more of an eclectic style and taste to DJing, whereas Kool Herc was playing funk, James Brown, soul, Aretha Franklin, maybe some rock, courtesy of Babe Ruth, the Mexican. We'll get into that song a little later. Bambaataa was introducing music that you would not have thought a DJ could play and get away with at a park jam. You guys remember, if you're old enough, you know, again, I'm 53. I remember as a kid, I used to watch the Mickey Mouse Club. Anyone remember that? So for those that remember the Mickey Mouse Club, you guys are familiar with that one song. It was like a theme song. I have the album, right? And there's a theme song to the show that's funky. It has like cool drums. And if you buy doubles of it, you could catch it and spin it and beat juggle it and do all kind of cool stuff and get people dancing and reacting to the music. This isn't a style of song that you would hear at a nightclub during the disco era. But Bam was open-minded enough to start just grabbing music from all places, from anywhere. If it sounded good and it had a dope beat, he would play it. Again, Bambaataa is from the Caribbean. Grandmaster Flash. Flash is the DJ that started to put technique to DJing. So for Flash, it wasn't just about having the loudest sound system like Herc. For Flash, it wasn't about having the most eclectic collection of music like Bambaataa. For Flash, it was about technique. Grandmaster Flash, as a teen, was going to a vocational school to learn how to become an electrician. So his mind worked in a way that made him a scientist on the turntables. So Grandmaster Flash figured out techniques that DJs could apply to the turntables, could incorporate with the music that they were playing on those turntables in a way that kept time, in a way that applied music theory like bar structure and notes. And Grandmaster Flash is Caribbean. If you look at the three of them, before we started this conversation, what you see is three black dudes. But now in 2026, we're being forced to split hairs and specifically delineate who comes from where. And I use the word delineate in quotes because this is one of the words that these acronym brigades, I like to call them. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful towards anyone. There might be people that identify as foundational Black American in this audience, or as ADOS, American Descendants of Slaves, or as B1, Black First, in this audience, right, watching. So I don't mean to necessarily sound or come off disrespectful, but I call them acronym brigades because the irony in us delineating who comes from where and marking who's Black American and then who's everyone else, the irony in that mindset that we are dealing with in hip-hop culture on social media today is that hip-hop was a response to gang culture in the late 1960s and early 1970s. In the earlier part of the 70s decade in New York City, not only was there a fiscal crisis, there was also a sociological crisis in New York City and in other parts of the country as well. Richard Nixon was the president. His advisor was a guy named Patrick Moynihan, and Patrick Moynihan wrote a memo in January of 1970 that became known as the benign neglect memo. In this memo, he pathologized black people. But we have to be specific now, not just black Americans, but black people. So whether you were the son of Colombian immigrants like me, or the son of people from the South that migrated up north like yourself. Virginia? North Carolina. So it didn't matter. They just saw two black people in the 1970s, right? Daniel Patrick Moynihan wrote a memo to Richard Nixon, who he was advising at the time, saying, or pathologizing, I should say, black people throughout the country. This is on the heels of the civil rights movement, right? And so in this memo, and you guys could Google benign neglect memo, Patrick Moynihan, he's basically saying black families are in crisis. They grow up in single-parent homes. They're on drugs. Their children are delinquents. Maybe the time has come where the issue of race needs a period of benign neglect. And Richard Nixon then informed policies throughout the rest of his presidency that acted upon this advice that Patrick Moynihan gave him. In short, they were just throwing their hands up and saying, you know what, we're just gonna leave this issue alone for a few years and focus on other things. And as a result, you know how that word defund the police is like a very popular word, or it's become popular since incidences like George Floyd, Eric Garner in New York City, George Floyd in Minneapolis. They defunded the police, the fire department, the schools in the 1970s. And you know that saying, if a white person catches a cold, a black person is gonna catch a flu in back of that cold. It's worse for black people, right? So as a result, these kids turned to gang culture because there was no supervision taking place in New York City, especially areas like the Bronx, which were redlined, which is another issue that we could get to later. I don't want to hog up this interview, but what I'll wrap up my answer in saying is that gang culture is the predecessor to hip-hop culture. In 1971, December, Yellow Benji, the president of the Ghetto Brothers, sent Benjamin Cornell, Black Benji, to moderate peace between two rival gangs. At this site, Black Benji, Benjamin Cornell, was murdered. As a result, Yellow Benji called a peace meeting. And in December of 1971, at the Boys Club, at Hoe Avenue in the Bronx, all the gangs in New York City were jammed into this gymnasium, and they basically established a peace accord amongst all the gangs. So the point that I'm trying to make is, for there to be this division now in 2026, when you consider what happened after that peace meeting was DJs were able to set up in a park and play music without anyone getting killed, and now we're arguing with each other about where you're from, it makes no sense to me, you know?
You actually touched on a number of things that, some things that you covered in this book, and we'll get to this. So for those who are not aware, Rob Swift recently released a book called The City of Hip Hop. And forgive me, I forget the subtitle, New York City.
The Bronx and a Peace Meeting.
Yes.
And I co-wrote it with Rasul Moat.
Yes, yes. And so I wanted to ask, I feel like, you touched on this in the book, I think early on, kind of setting the tone in terms of, there have been books and classes and events around hip hop and talking about, the who, the what, and the when. But I feel like this book more so focuses on the why and the how, which are two things that, again, that get lost, that seem to get lost in a lot of conversations. So with that, I kind of want to ask about you even approaching this book and making this book, why you decided to put this book out, or the both of you decided to put this book out, and then follow that up with kind of the how. What was the process for you all to work together, collect research, things like that, to bring this to life?
I appreciate you asking that, Tone, because the why, with regards to what inspired me to write the book, is sort of depressing, to be honest with you. In 19, I'm such a 53-year-old. In 2021, I was touring with ESPN. I was the DJ for College Game Day on Saturdays. So I was touring, and I'd spend a lot of time at my hotel in these college towns, bored, not knowing what to do, scrolling on my phone like we do when we have boredom in our minds. And I started noticing on Twitter, there was this narrative, these debates taking place that were framing hip hop as a culture that belonged to Black Americans exclusively. And I remember in 2021, when I started discovering this new narrative, first thinking to myself, Black American, like, why are they putting Black and American together? Why aren't they just saying Black? So that was weird to me. And then I started engaging in these debates on Twitter, or we call it X now. So a friend of mine that follows me on Twitter, her name is Tamika Franklin, called me one day and was like, Rob, you're not arguing with hip-hop nerds. In my head, I thought, because I know what I know, right? And as you could see, I'm a talker. I love talk, especially about hip-hop. So I would engage with these people and get into, like, on Twitter or social media in general, you could spend a day arguing with one person, right? So that is what was happening to me. But on Twitter, it wasn't just one person. It was like I'd say something and then 20 people would attack me. And I didn't realize what was happening. And a friend of mine, Tamika, hit me up one day and she was like, Rob, you do realize you're not debating with hip-hop nerds. You're debating with people that belong to a movement and their plight is reparations. So I was like, wait, so these aren't like just regular hip-hop nerds that think they know about the history of hip-hop but are talking out their ass? She was like, no, you're talking to a lot of people that follow a guy named Tariq Nasheed. And Tariq Nasheed is, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm trying to be respectful. Projecting, disseminating misinformation about hip-hop because that's his hustle. So now I'm like, oh, all right, so these aren't hip-hop nerds. These are people that are trying to revise. These are revisionists, right? They're trying to switch up the history to fit this narrative that this culture is being taken from them, from non-Black Americans. So now I'm still arguing with these people, but from a different angle, trying to educate them about the diversity in the culture, trying to educate them. And what happened was this. I was engaging one of them and said something about the diversity that I experienced as a hip-hop head in the 1970s and early 80s. Again, I'm 53. I started breaking in 1979. I started writing graph in 1981. I started I started DJing in late 1983, early 1984. I've been around and I've seen a lot of things with regards to hip hop culture. And so I'm correcting this one guy on Twitter, and then he turned around and called me a filthy Latino. And I'm like, I've never even had a white person call me filthy Latino. Now there's this black person calling me filthy Latino, and like, we're the same color. If anything, I'm blacker than you. And you're calling me filthy Latino. And that's when I was like, I'm gonna write a book, because hip hop has been hijacked by these groups that are trying to lump it into their reparations plight. And they're doing it in a really messy way. And so that's what made me write the book.
Appreciate that. So one of the things, and don't want to give too much away in terms of the book, but one of the concepts that you touched on, which I found really interesting, was when kind of describing when something is hip hop, or when hip hop occurs. So, we have the different elements that, I'm sure most of people are familiar with, the elements of DJing, MCing, breaking, graffiti. Then you have the fifth element of knowledge itself. There's also been debate around, what the additional elements are. But I feel like you all made a good point in the book in terms of, you describe hip-hop is what occurs when two or more elements exist together in the same shared space, or kind of working off of one another. Because over the years, obviously, when we think about, well, what's the first rap record, what's the first DJ, what's the first graph, artist, I mean, there's a lot of interpretations. So for graffiti, you could almost argue, well, back in the day of hieroglyphics on the walls, that's graffiti too. Or for DJing, there have been DJs, again, like you said, throughout the 70s, before we consider, hip hop. So would you say there's any gray area to that by chance? I'm just curious in terms of what would be considered hip hop. And I would use one little example, just personal example. Years ago, I had the pleasure of traveling to India through a program where it was a team of hip hop artists. We worked with youth and other people there. And I remember a group of young folks that we engaged with in Kolkata were pretty much all breakers. And I remember we were kind of following them down the street one day to some space where they kind of hang out or whatnot. And for me, watching them engage with one another, their energy, the fact that they were saying stuff that I was hearing referenced, in earlier hip hop movies and stuff like that, them saying like, yeah, it's hard for us to find a spot for us to do this because the clubs don't let us come in here do this, what have you. Now, although they were absent of like an MC, producer, and even a DJ at times, I felt like their energy definitely gave off this is genuine hip hop right here. But in India, of all places. But at the same time, of course, whenever they got a chance, music was playing, they're listening to mixtapes from DJs, things like that. So all that to say, do you feel like any, again, kind of gray area wiggle room around that?
Great question, love it. Okay, I'll start here, Tone. So if you're watching a DJ, or you're at a club listening to a DJ, and he or she is playing Drake and Nicki Minaj and Lil Wayne and LL Cool J and any other rap song that you could think of from an artist in any decade, does that make it hip hop? Is the question. Let's say Britney Spears walked in here and played Drake, Nicki Minaj, Lil Wayne, LL Cool J, any artist from any decade that you could think of. Does that make Britney Spears a hip hop DJ? No. So that's the simplest, most direct way I could answer the question. But I'm a talker, so I'll get more in depth now. In the early 1970s, you had DJs before Kool Herc, before Africa Bambaataa, before Grandmaster Flash, before Grandmaster Theodore, playing the music that the DJs I just mentioned played at parks. One song that comes to mind is Sol Makossa by Manu Dibango. This is a staple B-boy break. B-boy break meaning this is a song that the rockers, we termed breaking in the 1970s as rocking. Breaking is a term that became popular in the early 1980s. So the rockers, the B-boys, would go off to this song, Manu Dibango, Sol Makossa. That song was being played in nightclubs by the likes of David Mancuso, Nicky Ciano, Francis Grasso. Do those sound like Black American names? Asking you guys, yeah or no? No. Those are 3 Italian DJs in discos playing the same music that Herc, Bam, Flash played in parks. So if breakbeats is the wider term that we coin for the kind of songs that the DJs that we affiliate hip-hop culture with for playing, then why don't we say David Mancuso, Nicky Ciano, and Francis Grasso were the fathers of hip-hop DJing, right? In 1975, not 1973, in 1975, and I'm going according to 2 facts, or 1 fact, and then 1 reference from a guy named Charlie Rock, who was an original Zulu king. Zulu kings were, you have Zulu Nation, Zulu kings were the breakers, the dancers, the b-boys of Zulu. Charlie Rock is first generation Zulu king. You could, after you leave here, or even now, put your AirPods in as I'm talking, do a search for Charlie Rock Zulu, and he'll tell you they started breaking to Kool Herc's music at spots like the Hivolo in 1975. Breaking was not occurring, although you might have seen a vernacular of the dance in James Brown, right? Doing a split, or maybe some documentary of Africans in northern Nigeria doing swipes from the 1940s, doing swipes, doing headspins, doing floats. Or you might have seen a movie like Wild Boys on the Road with an actor named Frankie Darrow doing a headspin. So you might have seen the vernacular of the dance, glimpses of it in James Brown or a black and white film or a documentary about this celebratory dance called cavorting, courtesy of Africans. Or Roberto Roena, as a Latino, he's a salsero from Puerto Rico, used to get on the ground and do helicopter moves and footwork similar to what you would see a Ken Swift do in a movie like Star Wars or Wild Style. So although glimpses of the dance existed before 1975, no one was calling it hip hop, right? But in 1975, something about that year, I don't know what was in the air, but according to Charlie Rock, that's when dancers started to go down to the floor and do the footwork that we attribute to being breaking. 1975. And the DJ that helped curate that environment was Kool Herc. There's also an article in the East Village Eye. Michael Holman, who was like a banker, came to New York City, I believe from California, possibly LA, arrived in the early 1980s and got mixed into the scene that was taking place in the Bronx, New York, and the Lower East Side, the scene that was nameless in 1980, and interviewed Africa Bambaataa, rest in peace, in 1982. This is when that scene that was nameless prior to 1982 officially got its name, hip-hop. Interviewed Africa Bambaataa, and I have it. If anyone wants to see it afterwards, I'll show it to you. It's in my phone. In the article, The East Village Eye, Michael Holman asks Africa Bambaataa, when did you start Zulu Nation? He doesn't say 1973, which is what you'd find now in recent interviews. And I say that respectfully. In the article, he says 1975. 1975, we started Zulu Nation at his high school. So 75 is when the synergy that you referenced, that we talk about in the book, between the DJ and the dancer started to take place. 1975 is when Zulu Nation started. So for me, the start point of hip hop culture is 1975, to answer your question, because that's when the synergy took place between the dancer and the DJ. Hip-hop was not given birth to in one day at one party by one DJ. In 1973, I'm sure you guys, and any of the heads know, that's the date that's been pushed onto us by the OGs of this culture as being the birth date of hip-hop, August 11th, 1973. And Kool Herc threw a party at 1520 Cedric Avenue, where he lived, inside a rec room, a recreation room. That's the start of hip-hop. But the thing about it is, Herc was just playing music. So I know that you guys are kind of connecting the dots of what I'm saying. If you rewind back to what I was referencing regarding Britney Spears, if she plays Soul Makossa and it's just there standing there in front of CDJs or turntables, does that make her a hip-hop DJ? No. It makes her a standard DJ. And you had standard DJs way before Kool Herc. Kool Herc did not invent DJing. And I named 3 Italian DJs that played in the discos, but they weren't hip-hop DJs. What makes it hip-hop is the synergy that takes place. That's what hip-hop is. It's synergy. It's say ho, ho. That's what hip-hop is. It's an exchange of energy. That, to me, is what hip-hop is. And I don't mean to get esoteric or scientific on you guys, but I just feel like when you listen to a OG, let's say, or even a modern hip-hop artist, quote-unquote, talk, they talk in a very reductive way about this culture, and it's deeper than that. So hip-hop, to me, is action. That's another way of putting it. It's what's happening. So an album that says Eric B. and Rakim paid in full, and they're 2 dudes on a cover with rope chains, that's not hip-hop. That's a product that we call rap music. And I'm not saying that rap music is less than hip-hop or bad or any of that. I'm not trying to judge it. What I'm saying is rap is the product that you buy, that you sell, that you mass produce. Hip-hop is the action that you witness, and then when the action stops, it disappears. It goes poof, doesn't exist anymore. So hip-hop is action, you know? And so for that action to take place, you need the synergy between you and the party people, or you and the dancer, or you and your rapper. You see what I'm saying? So that's why in the book we talk about the synergy. Now, is there a gray area? I mean, if I'm by myself cutting it up in my bedroom, practicing, scratching, employing techniques that I learned from watching Grandmaster Flash, but if I'm by myself and there isn't a breaker in the room, or there isn't someone to say, ho, back to me, right? Am I still interacting with hip hop? That's where I would give you a gray area and say yes, because again, hip hop is what you do, it's how you transform one thing into another thing. So for example, if I let a song play from beginning to end, I pick up the needle, place the needle on the vinyl, and then let the song play from beginning to end, that's what a standard DJ would do. But the hip hop DJ says, I'm gonna take my hand, put it on the record, and move it back and forth and create a sound. That sound we call scratching. And scratching is a technique that we all credit Grand Wizard Theodore for introducing into the culture of DJing. So what you do to the record makes it hip hop. I feel like my thesis, my argument for what hip hop is infallible, because what I'm saying is it's action. So if you are engaging in this action, whether you're Britney Spears or DJ Coco Chanel, when you are engaging with this action, the action itself is hip hop. And the minute you stop, hip hop has gone. It's disappeared. It went poof. It doesn't exist, you know? So you can't look at a white person to kind of tie this conversation, right, back to like how we started talking about what influenced me to write the book and so on and so forth. You can't look at a person that's white and be like, oh, they're not hip hop, if they're engaging in the elements and they're taking part in that action. Because it's an amorphous culture. It's not a culture that you could box into any category or form. That's why it's changed so much, and that's why producers take inspiration from all styles of music, all genres, all types of artists and bands. So yeah, that to me is what hip hop is.
Nice. Now you referenced a producer, and I have a kind of a random question, not really tied into the book, but as we talk about these elements, I'm curious what your take would be on, in terms of these other, I'll say, practitioners of hip hop that I feel like don't immediately get placed in one of the, I guess, your four traditional boxes. So between, again, your DJs, your MCs, graffiti artists, and breakers, where would you say the beatboxers and the producers fall into those scenarios? I mean, I have a...
Yeah, hopefully I'm understanding the question properly. I think the way I would answer that is by saying producers can be labeled as hip-hop producers when they employ or transfer the techniques that a Grandmaster Flash contributed to a machine like the SB1200 or an MPC 60. What I mean by that is this. Grandmaster Flash came up with his version of keeping time, extending the break on beat, opposed to what Kool Herc was doing, which was playing music and transitioning between songs in a very, what Grandmaster Flash would say, law of disarray approach, right? So
like how you put that, yeah.
It's messy,
yeah.
right?
Yeah,
because Kool Herc didn't have headphones. Grandmaster Flash had the resourcefulness and the wherewithal, because he went to school to become an electrician, to go to Radio Shack and create an external queuing box that allowed him to queue up songs, sounds, and then place them on time. When you take that style of manipulating music and apply it to a medium like an SB1200 or an MPC 60 or any kind of sampler, or even on a Mac computer, right? You have a program that allows you to produce splicing songs, chopping sounds up. That is what a hip-hop DJ does manually on a turntable. You're just changing the medium, but the process, the action, is hip-hop. So to me, a producer is just as hip-hop as Grandmaster Flash if they're taking that source of sound that a DJ like Flash would take and flipping it in their way even if they're using a different medium and it's not just a turntable.
Yeah.
If it's a sampler, it's still hip hop.
So would you say, I guess, to that, if someone were to ask, where does a producer fall within the elements of hip hop, would you just say they're an extension of the DJ?
I'd say they're an extension of the DJ. And as far as a beatboxer, again, we're talking about marginalized, poor black and brown kids that didn't have access to programs like band at schools. So what they would do is bang on tables, coom, cat, coom, coom, cat, coom, cat, coom, coom, cat, and someone would rap over some guy banging on a table, and then that morphed into making noises with your mouth, and then someone rapping over that. Again, action. Action. Once that action stops, you don't have hip hop anymore. It disappears. But when you're engaged in that action, when you're doing it, if you're a beatboxer or a rapper or a person taking their hand, putting it on a piece of vinyl and moving that vinyl back and forth to create a scratch, or whether you're taking a spray can to a train, that action is what hip hop is. You know, so I have just as much respect for a beatboxer. And I don't know if they're necessarily an extension of the DJ, because that's just such a, you know, you're making this noise with your mouth. The ultimate form of resourcefulness, in my opinion. But it's just another element of it. But the core four elements are DJing, MCing, breaking, and graffiti.
Word. Now, you mentioned resourcefulness, and I have and this, coming from a DJ, this is more, for me, more of a fun question. So imagine you're going to a DJ gig, and between your needles, headphones, slip mats, and let's just, say for technology's sake, your Serato control records. If one of those four is missing, which would you prefer to be missing? Right before it, 5 minutes, you got to start in 5 minutes, and you're missing either your needles. let's say I'll give you half an hour, but you can't go too far. You're missing your needles or your headphones or your slip mats or your control records. Ooh, if you can pick one to, you know what?
Right.
If I ain't got this,
just one, right?
Just one.
So I could go without headphones.
Okay.
That's how hip hop DJing started. Kool Herc, in the formative years of his career developing, would cue songs by opening the fader for a split second to hear where he was on the opposite song that he was about to transition to. So he would open a fader and know the record well enough that if he heard just a second of a song, he'd know, all right, one more revolution and the break part is coming. Or I passed the break part. I gotta rewind maybe 2 or 3 revolutions back. Let me test it one more time, open the fader, listen for that sound. All right, I'm there. So if Herc did that in 1973, me at 2026, I have the instincts and the intuition that will help me figure out how to transition from song to song for at least 30 minutes without those headphones. So,
and I should have probably added too, let's also imagine your screen is cracked, so you can't even, let's say, see everything. You know how to, you can load up the song, but you can't see the wavelengths, all that kind of stuff.
That's a great question, because just now, 10 seconds ago, I referenced the intuitiveness that goes into this style of DJing. If you watch Mr. Sinister and myself perform as the Odd Couple, a lot of times I have in-ear headphones. They're sort of like those Secret Service headphones, just go right in your ear. And a lot of times you'll see me take it off because I really want to be present with the music and what Sin's doing, and I don't want to be distracted by what I'm hearing inside my ear. So I don't have to look at a laptop because I've been DJing so long that I understand how to track the mark that we all use as like a hand of a clock on a piece of vinyl. So as that vinyl is turning, I look at the mark turn as the record is revolving around the turntable, which is something a lot of DJs today that buy controllers don't do. What they do is they stare at the computer as they're touching the jog wheel of a CDJ. And then when they're switching, they're still staring. You know, they're moving over to that other side of the jog wheel and they're still staring at the computer because they don't trust their own instincts. I've developed my instincts to a degree where even if the computer screen's cracked, I trust myself to be able to navigate music if I didn't have headphones.
Nice, nice. Now you brought up also Mr. Sinister, who's together you all part of the Odd Couple, but even before that, you know, part of this larger crew, Executioners,
Yes.
X-Men. Could you tell us a little bit about, I know it originally started with, if I'm not mistaken, the X-Men, and that was Steve D, Diamond
C.
J, Sean C, Johnny Cash.
It started with Steve D, Sean C, Johnny Cash, and Rock Raider, rest in peace.
Yes.
The four of them began in 1989, I want to say, probably as early as 1988. And they were friends. Steve D was friends with Sean C.
Dope producer, I must add.
Yeah.
So Sean C, if y'all don't know, please check out his catalog.
Yeah, he's produced Black Thought, Jay-Z, all kind of your favorite rapper's rapper he's worked with, basically. So Sean was friends with Rock Raider. They lived in the Lenox Avenue area of Harlem. Steve D was friends with Johnny Cash. They were from the St. Nicholas region of Harlem. Steve knew Sean. And then Sean introduced Steve to Raider, and Steve introduced Sean to Johnny, and then they became like this foursome. Steve D was the first one out of the four to start entering sanctioned DJ battles. I'm referencing competitions like the New Music Seminar Battle for World Supremacy, doesn't take place anymore, unfortunately, and the DMC, which still happens worldwide. Steve would enter these competitions that were curated by Clark Kent, rest in peace, from the Supermen. And the Supermen were DJs under Clark that were nasty. I'm talking about the likes of Richie Rich, who DJ'd for Third Base, DJ Scratch, who DJ'd for EPMD, Plastic Man, and Clark Kent was the leader. Now, Clark was the curator of these competitions and would have his Supermen, Rich, Scratch, judge the battles that he was curating, and then they would have proteges of theirs enter the battles. So when Steve started competing, he felt that the battles were rigged because there's a Superman curating the competition, there's Supermen judging the competition, and then there are proteges of the Supermen competing. So Steve felt like, yo, I'm not gonna win these battles because even though I'm nasty, they're gonna pick the guy that they're cool with or they're training. So Steve was like, yo, F those dudes, man. I'm gonna create my own crew and battle them. And that's how they formed the X-Men. So earlier we started off with Marvel, DC.
Yes.
That was literally Marvel versus DC. That's why they called themselves the X-Men, because they wanted to battle the Superman.
Now, and we got to kind of get to the Q&A soon, but I want to kind of get back to the Marvel DC thing. More specifically Marvel, since you said that was the pick. So I know the crew eventually kind of morphed to the Executioners with you, Total Eclipse, Rock Raider,
right,
rest in peace, and Mr. Sinister. So for those gentlemen in your crew, and here's where I want to reference the Marvel thing, what Marvel character, in terms of gifts and abilities, would you liken each member to? So if you were to say, like, Rock Raider is the, let's say, I don't know, like, is the Wolverine,
this is good,
if you will, because it is. And I was, I would say, also, let's say gender aside, because you might even say, like, hey, he's more like Jean Grey's powers and ability, So what characters would you liken them with, and kind of why for each one?
Rock Raider, you called it, is Wolverine, for sure. Okay. You vouch for that, right? Okay. Rock Raider is Wolverine because he's just a fierce competitor. And like Wolverine, he loves the competition. Wolverine loves to fight. He lives for it. Rock Raider, when you watch them battle, it's like he was fighting his opponent. From his facial expressions, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it right now, to the way he moved his body, it's like he was fighting you. And definitely, Rock Raider, I see Wolverine every time a YouTube video pops up with him on my phone. Mr. Sinister, to me, reminds me a lot of Gambit.
Oh.
Yeah, he's just like the raging Cajun. And he's funny, he's witty like Gambit, and his personality, that wit, that humor comes out on the turntables.
Nice.
Total Eclipse, to me, is Beast.
Beast.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And more than anything, you're welcome, Sin. More than anything, I know that Beast was like a scientist and all that, and like, it's not so much that I feel Total Eclipse is a scientist, although he is. There are things that he does on the turntables that are like a hybrid of me, Rock Raider, and Mr. Sinister. But I see him as a beast more than his scientific approach to DJing. He's a beast. Total Eclipse, that dude, again, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. When I met him, it was 1994, and he was competing at a battle at New York University that I was judging. And at the time, all he could do was body tricks, using different parts of his body to manipulate the turntables, and he could backspin super fast. Good times, good, good. He won the battle. I remember leaving the NYU campus. I hear my name being yelled by some guy. I turned around, and it's him. He's chasing me down the block on my way to the train station. He's like, Rob, man, yo, I'm a big fan. I had so much fun today. I just wanted to know if I could practice with you. There was just a really cool energy about him. And I gave him my number, which I don't usually do, because DJs like myself are really secretive about what we share.
Yeah.
Something about him was just like, I don't know. He seemed cool, and like his heart was in the right place. Started coming over my house. I started teaching him patterns of mine, patterns like hand choreography that was unique to me. And then he took those movements to the next level. Then he started training with Sinister, took Sin's movements to the next level. Then he started training with Raider, took Raider's body tricks to the next level. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. And then finally we were like, yo, we got to put him down or else he's going to battle all of us and win.
It almost sounds like he might be borderline Rogue or Mystique, if you will.
Well, you know what? Rogue or Mystique, too, because they're shapeshifters, right?
Yeah,
and so, and myself, I would say I'm Cyclops. I'm the field general. And, you know, I don't think that comes as a shock to you guys. I'm very heady, you know, and I'm a nerd. And whenever we step on stage, I'm the one kind of like just directing everything and making sure everyone's in place and we're ready to kill it.
Word,
so, yeah.
Word. Now, I appreciate that, man.
Yo, and real quick, I know that we're going to get to the Q&A, but the one thing I wanted to say about the Superman, to keep it on the comic book thing, and to kind of tie this nicely into one little package and put a bow on it. Although the X-Men wanted to battle the Superman, and we were like, F those guys. Like, I got down in 1991. 2.5 years after the X-Men formed. So I used to love Rich. Well, let me rephrase that. I loved Rich as a 18-year-old kid. I loved DJ Scratch as an 18-year-old kid. But when I was 19 and got inducted into the X-Men, I hated Rich. I hated Scratch because my thing was like, I'm an X-Men now. So F those guys too. But fast forward to 2026, we're doing this interview right now. If my phone rang and I saw that it was Richie Rich, I'd be like, yo, just give me a quick second. Yo, Rich, I'm going to call you back. Like, that's how much respect I have for the Superman. And Clark Kent called me weeks before he passed away. Weeks before he passed away, and I didn't know that he was sick. He passed away from cancer. And he called me just to say, Rob, I'm proud of you. And bro, what you're doing for hip hop culture, the way you're protecting it, I'm just really proud of you, bro. And I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. And what I want to say is just that even though we started off not liking them, those are my big brothers now, you know? And
Word.
Clark, I miss you to death. Richie Rich, that guy could call me any time of day. I'll pick up the phone and talk to him for as long as he needs to talk to me. Scratch, that dude is a beast. He's had so much influence on DJ culture. Yeah. And so, yeah, bro, like, to me, that's an example of how we could be on different teams, right? We could be on different teams and hate each other, but have respect for each other's creativity. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the hate isn't personal, it's competitive.
Competitive, yeah.
You know, and that's what we need right now in hip hop culture, not this divisiveness. We could, you know, not be on the same team, but respect each other creatively.
Yeah.
Regardless of where you're from.
Y'all really appreciate it. I Lord knows I could ask you a whole slew of other questions,
No
but
doubt.
I know we got to kind of wrap things up. So at this time, if anyone has any questions they'd like to ask for Brother Rob, my man, yeah, come on up.
Yeah, maybe, yeah, get on the mic. Get on the mic.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
you could, yeah.
Pleasure to meet you today.
No doubt.
My name is Jimmy Reed. My wife and I, we host a weekly DJ meetup, right? For the last 38 weeks, we have like 20, 25 DJs coming out. And we witnessed them go from not being able to blend or play the next record to being able to get their first paid gig. In 2026, what would you say to that DJ who's just starting out to motivate them to take it to that next level, or just to accept that, go for that next gig?
That's a great question. In 2026, my advice to anyone that has just started DJing is be authentic. Be true to yourself. Don't follow trends. Be resourceful. Think outside of the box. You know? Try your best, even though you might be influenced by another DJ, whether it's myself or Sinister or Qbert or Tone or whoever it is. This art form will die if it doesn't grow creatively. And what I'm seeing right now with a lot of DJs is they want to learn how to do a popular scratch, for example, so that they can go viral. They want to learn how to do a cool mashup so that they could land a residency. And for me, coming up as a kid, going viral or having the residency wasn't even a thought. I just wanted to be creative and express myself. If you stay true to that tenet, the virality that comes with social media, the money that comes with DJing as a resident DJ at some club follows naturally because you stand out. So be creative, be original as much as you can, and trust me, the rewards will come after.
Word, word.
Word. Any other questions?
Any other questions? My man over here, yeah.
Feel free to like walk up and kind of make your way to the mic if you have a question.
How you doing? My name is Patrick. I'm an artist over here. I like to ask real hip hop has this question, because everybody has like their standard, who's your greatest MC, and everybody says, you know, like Rakim, Nas. Some people can't even name 5 Rakim songs. So as a real hip hop head, who's your number one favorite MC?
Coogee Rap.
Oh, Queens in the house.
Coogee Rap.
Queens
Coogee
is-
Rap is nasty.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, right? You can't be mad at that. Coogee Rap is my favorite. Road to the Riches, that album is insane. And the thing about it is his flow influenced so many rappers. I could think of, I don't want to say any names because I don't want anyone to get mad at me, but Pun is probably the most obvious. And Pun, Big Pun himself has said he's been influenced by Cool G Rap. So G Rap, definitely.
Word, word. Another question in? Yeah.
What's up, Rob?
Yo, yo.
Yo, man, I just want to say, first of all, I appreciate that, not only just here, but also online. Like, you're very open with your opinions, and I appreciate that you put yourself out wholeheartedly, whether it's shit that people agree with or they do not. So, first of all, salute on that. My question is, what was the first technique that either you, anyone in the X-Men, or like Dr. Butcher did that you saw that you're like, yo, no one has done this shit before, period? Like, what was the first technique that you remember witnessing in person?
I love that question because the first technique, it wasn't in person, it was on TV that I saw that my reaction was, no one has ever done this before too, was Steve D performing a style of DJing that we call beat juggling. There's backspinning. You take a sound and repeat that sound, or you take a word or a phrase and repeat that word or phrase. So for example, Good Times by Chic was a popular song that Grandmaster Flash would backspin. Good times, doom, doom, good times, boom, boom, good times, good, 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 and just keep rewinding. But Steve D would isolate the drum part of Good Times and rearrange the drums and make them sound completely different. Similar to what a producer, earlier today we were talking about whether or not producing could be considered as an element of hip hop. Producers would splice a kick, a snare, a hi-hat from a track like Good Times. Take Premier, for example. You give him Good Times, he's chopping that break up and making it sound like something totally different. Steve D did this with his hands on turntables. And I remember seeing it for the first time on TV in 1990. I'm in my living room watching Video Music Box. Big shout to Ralph McDaniels. And he airs an excerpt of the 1990 East Coast DMC battle at a spot called the Car Wash. Steve D was one of the competitors, and he's beat juggling. So your question is dope to me because you phrased it by saying, what technique did you see that made you feel, what technique did you see made you feel like, whoa, I've never seen a DJ do this before? It was beat juggling. But here's the thing, here's the little caveat. Just because you see something for the first time and your brain then goes, wow, this is the first time I'm seeing this, no one else is doing it, it doesn't mean that someone else hasn't done it before. Later on, I would say about 1991, when I met Dr. Butcher, my mentor, who you referenced, ironically, he had a videotape of the 1989 American DMC finals. On that videotape, you had Aladdin, who was a beast from LA, but you also had a DJ from Philly called DJ Miz. And on that videotape, Miz takes a Steady B record. I forget the name of the record or the song, and he takes the beat and flips it. Not as technically advanced as Steve D did in 1990, but this is 1 year before. Miz takes a kick snare, kum kum cat, the kum cat, and he goes kum kum cat, chicka kum cat, chicka kum cat, kum cat kum cat, kum cat kum cat, kum cat kum cat, backspinning it, but in a rhythmic way. That's a beat juggle. And so I remember seeing the videotape and thinking, oh shit, like this whole time I thought Steve D was the first one to isolate a beat, a drum beat on a song and flip it, rearrange it with his hands manually. But Miz did this a year prior. Again, it wasn't as advanced, but still he was doing it. So now when I see a DJ do something that I've never seen before, what I like to say is that DJ was in the vicinity. He was in the spiritual space to tap into that technique. The techniques all exist already. It's, are you within the spiritual space to tap into it and hear yourself doing it and then refining it and developing it, you know? So right now, there's, I'm sure, an infinite amount of things that none of us have thought of doing, that one day there's gonna be a DJ that's gonna surface on Instagram or YouTube doing that thing.
Nice.
No doubt.
Nice. Cool, cool. Any other questions before we wrap up? Brother Rob, yeah, come on up, my man.
What's up, Rob?
Oh, Skiz! Oh my God! Yo, sit down, bro. Sit down. Come sit down.
Rob.
Yo, guys, this is Skiz Fernando. He wrote a really dope book on MF Doom, and I'm in one of the pages. Skiz, what? Also, Skiz wrote a book called The New Beats back in what, 96?
92. I was just talking to Sinister. I interviewed you and him back in East Elmhurst, Queens.
Yep.
With Dr. Butcher.
Yep.
And then you guys took me back to Large Professor's crib.
Yep.
Where he had the SP set up
Yep.
and little
Yep.
bare light bulb. And
This-
anyway,
look, I wrote a book called The City of Hip Hop, and this is my inspiration. Like, I never thought you could even write a book about this culture. And in the 90s, he was my first inspiration that you could take this to the library. You know what I'm saying? So this is really dope to have you here, Skiz. What's up?
yo, and I really appreciate your book, City of Hip Hop. That was some deep shit.
Thank you,
That
man.
has never before been let out to the public. So I would recommend everyone get that book, City of Hip Hop.
Yeah, I have it here, by the way.
One thing I wanted to clarify, I had a little bone to pick with you
Shoot.
about August 11th, 1973, Kool Herc's first party. The way I understand it is that's not significant because it was like the birth of hip hop, but it's significant because that was the first time Herc actually debuted the break beats. He was working on them in his crib independently. This is what I heard. And then when his sister had the back to school party, they threw a party in the rec room of Cedar Ave, their building.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was the first time that he actually DJ'd in public.
You heard
And
73?
debuted-
73?
Yeah, debuted,
August 11th?
Debuted the break beat at that party. And also at that party, we can't forget, was Coke La Rock, who was really like the first MC.
Right.
And he picked up the mic and he was just like, you know, talking over. He wasn't exactly rapping, but he was talking
Right,
over
talking.
the beats. I just wanted to say, what do you?
Yeah. So here's my response to that, Skiz. If you listen to a Kool Herc interview, when you guys leave today, search Kool Herc on YouTube. Origins of Hip Hop. I'm sure he's gonna say this at some point in the interview. One night, that's the key word. One night, I was playing music and I was looking at the crowd and I was like, hold up. If people are waiting for a particular part of the record, i.e. the break part, to come on before they go down to the floor and rock, right? Do footwork and all the different posturing that B-boys did as dancers back then. This is Herc talking. If people are waiting for the break part on a particular record to come in before they start going down to the floor, and I have a lot more songs with similar style breaks in it, and some of these songs I have doubles on it, why don't I just figure out a way to isolate? He doesn't say isolate, but he says, why don't I figure out a way to extend those parts, those climactic parts of the records, so that the B-boys could keep going off.
The merry-go-round.
And he calls it the merry-go-round. So my thing is, if he's saying in an interview, one night I noticed people were waiting for the break part, that night could not have been the first party. It had to be, in my logical mind, it had to be Well, I mean, Charlie Rock says it. An original Zulu king, Charlie Rock, says, we started breaking at Kool Herc parties in 1975. So then that's Charlie Rock in one interview. We started breaking to Kool Herc at spots like the Hevelo in 1975. Then you take another interview from Kool Herc, and he says, one night I noticed people were waiting for the break part of a record that I might have been playing to go down to the floor, meaning break dance. So if people are waiting for this break part, and I have more records with break parts, and some of these records I have duplicate copies, why don't I just keep extending these climactic parts of these songs to keep the breakers going, which to your point is called the merry-go-round. So if Charlie Rock is saying we started breaking at Kool Herc parties in 1975, and Herc says one night, yada, 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 he couldn't have been doing it in 73. Because what inspired Herc to extend the break part were the dancers. He didn't get the inspiration out of nowhere. He says, I was watching the dancers wait for these parts. And one of the original first generation dancers says, we didn't start dancing at Kool Herc parties till 1975. So I don't believe, Skiz, I don't believe that it was 73. I believe that what we're celebrating, August 11th, 1973, 1520 Cedric Avenue, is the start of Kool Herc's DJ career. That's what I think we're celebrating in reality. And I think in 75, that's when the synergy started to take place between the DJs and the dancers, specifically the rockers, the breakers, because obviously there were people dancing at Herc parties before 75. But the idea of Herc extending a break and people dancing and doing footwork and all the cool things that they were doing back then, for whatever reason, that eureka moment between the DJ and the dancer, in my head, after listening to interviews, couldn't have been until 75.
Okay, fair enough. I'll take that. Also, just an opinion question from you, because Bambaataa died 2 days ago, and, you know, he's called the godfather of hip-hop.
Yes.
Not for some small reason. You know, I mean, this is a man who single-handedly engineered the Universal Zulu Nation.
Yes.
And the Zulu Nation took hip-hop outside the Bronx. They took hip-hop to downtown New York, okay, to all those clubs in downtown. They took it to Connecticut. They took it out of the New York City projects and introduced it to the world, okay?
Yes.
And you can go to any city in the fucking world right now. I was in Brazil recently. There's a fucking huge Zulu Nation in Brazil. And we have Bambaataa. You know, we have to be thankful for Bambaataa,
yes,
for that. But at 100%. The same time, how do you reconcile like his personal behavior? You know, apparently he was allegedly a child abuser, like Epstein, and it just like tanked his whole reputation. Just what are your comments on that?
Yeah, look, honestly, you know, and I don't mince words, I'm really direct. If the allegations are true, then that shit is gross. You know what I'm saying? Like, to use your standing, your power, your influence in a way that hurts people, right? And takes advantage of people. And in that way, like, I mean, that's never happened to me, but I can't think of how that would just scar you and traumatize you for the rest of your life. So how do you reconcile it? You don't. If he did those things, then he's a shitty person for doing those things. So two things could be true. Yeah, he's a shitty person for what he did, and he's also the person that gave life to this culture, and as you said, took it outside of New York City and made it worldwide.
Yeah, rest in peace, Bambaataa.
Rest in peace, Bambaataa.
Yeah,
No doubt.
Yeah.
And it's messed up if that's the truth, that he did all that stuff, but you can't erase his contributions to hip-hop either. But yo, Skiz, thank you for coming up, bro. Love you, man. Skiz, first book I ever, article, anything that I was ever featured in was his book, The New Beats, in the 90s. And For you to be here is crazy. And check out his MF Doom book. It's really dope. The Chronicles of MF Doom, right? The Chronicles of Doom. It's a really dope book.
Word. Well, yo, thank you so much for your time here.
Tone, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all so much for being here.
Word, much love.
And I hope everyone here leaves with a copy of The City of Hip Hop. Again, really great read. This belongs in any, I personally believe, any academic setting for hip hop, whether in universities, high schools. This book needs to be on the reading list for sure.
Thanks,
So,
Tone.
yeah, no,
And thanks for moderating, man. You did an amazing job.
thank you.
Felt like I was just up here talking to a good friend.
Yeah. Hey,
Word.
appreciate y'all, man. Thank y'all
Thank
so
you.
much.